Cargo Film Presents. My name is Dave.
Dan.
On Cargo Film Presents, we talk documentary films, and today we're going to be speaking about Attica. Stanley Nelson looks at the largest prison uprising in U.S. history.
Attica was fear.
There was 70% black and brown prisoners, all white guards. What could go wrong?
On September 9th, 1971, inmates at the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York took staff as hostages. After a 5-day standoff, police stormed the facility and with shocking brutality left 43 dead, including hostages that were taken. It is directed by the distinguished Stanley Nelson and Traci A. Curry. Finally, this film places the events of that episode into their rightful place and away from the Dog Day Afternoons and Orange is the New Black pop culture reference space. So what did you think, Dan?
Yeah, I was Attica. Like probably a lot of people, you're aware of the name from the pop culture references, perhaps, but you don't exactly know the significance of it or what was going on. So it seemed appropriate to make this film for the 50th anniversary. And I have to say, I was not expecting it, but it really hits hard. I mean, it is really a devastating account of one, this prison uprising and the very legitimate reasons for it, the inhumane conditions in Attica at the time. Everything from just abysmal medical care to, near solitary confinement for the inmates. You're in your cell for 16 hours a day, one roll of toilet paper for a month. Something like that. It's just kind of
and being physically abused and
racially abused, and so I mean it begins, and I have to say I think that it was a really smart choice by Stanley Nelson and Traci Curry to kind of give a blow by blow account of this. It's structured in kind of day 1, day 2, day 3, as the uprising continues and the standoff and the tension sort of builds, and eventually it explodes in the massacre. It just sort of slowly gets you, and it's just absolutely devastating, this film. And I was not expecting that at first. You're kind of like, oh, it's very heavy, like testimony driven, a lot of archive and testimony, which the testimonies are extraordinary, from the former inmates of the Attica uprising. But I would advise, if you do watch this and like you're not kind of into it or feeling it for the first 5-10 minutes, I would stick with it, because it's just, it's harrowing, and pretty devastating.
It does build to a real shocking climax. I mean, I'm gonna it's a dark picture of the state of affairs of American racial, the racial dynamic. The movie is kind of like a look at, American society. If you were looking at it through the Lord of the Flies lens, not Lord of the Rings, then I know you're a big fan, but Lord of the Flies, when, kind of morals go out the window and like the ugly id takes over. It's like turning the volume to 11. It's a horror movie double feature. It should have been an episode on what America looks like in a Twilight Zone episode, but it's all real, and it's all pretty awful.
The inmates were considered like animals.
They beat you up in your cell, and then they take you to segregation, and sometimes you don't come back.
Have the inmates made any demands?
There are all kinds of demands for change in the whole world.
And I think, part of it is because it just, it's not, there's an easy way to sensationalize this story, I suppose, and maybe that's been done. I haven't really seen, I know there's been other representations of it in maybe films and movies.
Right.
but I think it's just, it's just handled so deftly and so beautifully by Stanley and Traci, which is, and very soberly.
Mhm.
So you feel the full force of, not only the prison injustices, but also this massacre, which, geez, like,
Yeah.
you don't even want to describe it.
No, you don't. You don't. Yeah. Yeah.
They
I mean,
even,
it really should be
yeah,
seen
has to be
rather
seen. I mean,
than
the state
told.
police goes in there, telling everyone after they won't be harmed after all these negotiations break down. I guess we should say there was several days of negotiations
Right.
between the inmates, and an observation committee, as well as the director of the Department of Corrections, and they try and bring in Governor Nelson Rockefeller to
Right.
bring an end to this standoff, with some of their very legitimate demands,
Mhm.
which are rejected. And ultimately, the state police is sent in to just kill everyone, including the hostages. It seems
Including the
like,
hostages.
which
Yeah.
is just absolute
It's
madness.
just
Like you said,
maddening.
it's
It's maddening.
heart
Yeah.
of darkness kind of stuff going on here. And then it's essentially covered up, like for 50 years. And I haven't watched this, but there's also a documentary on HBO Max.
Yes.
About the story, which is more about the cover up and
Well, the
how,
cover up and the efforts from of the prisoners to get some sort of compensation for for those events,
right,
being brutalized.
which they ended up getting a couple million or something split between
Right.
them, sort of
Right.
go away money. We're sorry, we're not really
Yeah.
sorry, in the way America seems to like to handle its problems, which is throw a little bit of money at people and
right.
see if they go away.
Hope it goes away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, listen, often you and I, being in the doc film business, we come across a film and and that they're making, and we're like, really, do they really have to tell this story?
Yeah.
And this is certainly an instance where that's not the case. You're certainly, really. You want this to be part of kind of American history. People need to know how wrong, this story really was. And as you've touched upon, I mean, just amazing archives here. I mean, can you imagine stumbling upon this? It's remarkable that they've kind of stayed hidden for so long. You mentioned the HBO Max doc, and I don't think clearly that wasn't the focus of the HBO Max version of this story, because it was post uprising. But I'm sure once the filmmakers got their eyes on these archives, I'm sure they were compelled, to make a film of this. There's so many really terrific moments in these archives that, it's just astounding that they haven't seen the light of day. One example is where one of the inmates says that, makes a big speech, rousing the crowd that if they can't live as people in the prison, they'd rather die as men. And one of the observers, of the many observers that had been going into the prison to try to mediate the situation, on behalf of the police and the government, he was so moved that he rose to hug him. Just like one example of many that are pretty devastating in this film.
They wanted to use those weapons.
Put your hands in the air and you will not be harmed.
You will not be harmed. You will not be harmed. But that was bullshit.
As I think I read somewhere, I mean, there were obvious attempts to destroy all this material too. So it is remarkable that it even exists.
I didn't know that. Right.
State police or whoever was trying to, they were going to burn all this stuff because there was, besides some of those tender moments, obviously there's some just horrific stuff and weapons being planted by the police the state police to suggest that, this was somehow in any way justified. But it's hard. It's a tough one. I mean, you got to be, I think, or maybe
you
not.
got to be prepared for it.
I wasn't prepared, and it really hurt. It just reminds you of these terrible, terrible, horrible, dark chapters in American history. From Abu Ghraib, like it's that level of just human barbarism at its worst, just, unleashed, as you said, kind of Lord of the Flies kind of stuff. And still no justice. I mean, this is the other thing about it. I mean, there's really, like, it makes you feel quite hopeless in some ways, that there's still, no state police officer, no one has ever been charged with any crime.
That's right.
As far as I know, right?
No. I don't think anybody's ever pursued that at all. And it reminds me that, I suppose one of the strengths of the film is the effort to kind of spin out the story, beyond just the dynamics of what transpired in the prison between the prisoners and the people who were there, the law enforcement. It does try to broaden the scope and provides insight with and context, like describing the town, where the prison is located and the people who live there, and where so many of them were either directly or indirectly, being employed by the prison. It also introduces, as you said, those mediators sent in to try to broker a deal, which gives you that kind of beat by beat, play by play of the negotiations that were going on. So it adds an element of intrigue and tension. It shows of course, the political climate of the era, right? And that whole the start of the law and order ethos, and reveals those conversations between Rockefeller and Nixon, and the hard on crime kind of political tactics that were essentially the only option ever really discussed, on how to handle this situation, which is remarkable.
Yeah, you do get that. You do get some of the broader story. I mean, it's I guess it's also interesting that way. You get insight to the beginning of the prison industrial complex, as you said, where these towns just become prison towns. And this will become a kind of business model in America, whereby we'll incarcerate large numbers of people of color, and this will be a kind of prison capitalism at work. And you get the politics. I mean, the word, it's just so disgusting to see, Nelson Rockefeller, who essentially sanctions all of this for personal power, personal gain. He wants to be the next president,
right? Exactly.
And he's seen as weak on crime and law and order, and he wants to get in with Nixon.
Yep.
So, I mean, one of the things I think one of the testimonials from one of the former inmates, and he talks about, like, this didn't have to happen. And some of the observer committees say the same thing, but it was also a foregone conclusion, because Nelson Rockefeller was just this is how he was gonna handle it no matter what.
They want to kill us.
We are men.
He was waking up America.
Yeah, there was a lot of speculation as to why he wasn't intervening, or even showing up to the prison to try to alleviate the situation. But even below him, and the way law enforcement behaved, and the people who controlled the law enforcement, the people giving the orders. I mean, just from the top down, it seemed like it was all wrong all the time. From top to bottom. It's not necessarily nuanced storytelling here, and that's fine. I think if you want nuance, you go read a book. So it does paint the kind of tells a very good story on film, and it paints it with broad strokes, and listen, it's understood that not all the inmates are good people. I mean, the inmates say so, themselves, and it's pretty well documented that their treatment in the prison was unnecessarily, cruel and inhumane. And listen, I imagine, and not all of the mostly white prison staff were rabid racists, although it seemed like a good number of them were. Certainly enough of them were, that's for sure. But the filmmakers kind of do present this very clear disparity, and it's fine for the purposes of a a documentary film. That I think it works, dramatically, and it's still anchored enough of truth that you're not in danger of misleading people. That's not how it went down.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and the testimonies are just, they're so powerful, and they are so moving and still so fresh. Just goes to suggest how, insane and horrific the event was, that it's still so fresh in their memories and their experience and their bodies, which you can see in the interviews, which I think, Stanley Nelson did, and Traci did an amazing job with these interviews. And I did read somewhere that they actually had a few guards and police officers who agreed to be interviewed, but then, ultimately they backed out. I don't know, would that made it a more nuanced, or would it have muddied it a bit? I don't know, but it would have been perhaps interesting to hear their take, 50 years later,
right,
how they felt about this.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, if you were a part of that on the other side, I don't know. You wonder why it didn't make the cut. I'd be interested. I mean, if they were willing to discuss it.
They backed out.
They backed out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, geez. I mean, listen, to be, publicly, identified as being a part of that. Yeah, I someone would be concerned about that, I would think.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, terrific film, certainly required viewing for every American, I would say, and beyond, but certainly worth watching. And, we'll do watch with knowing that you need to have a strong stomach to handle it. But you could watch the film on Showtime. It is nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, and well worth the nomination, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be one of my favorite films, or was one of my favorite films of this past year, but it's certainly important, vital, and, like you said, required viewing. So check it out.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan. See you guys next time. Bye.
See you then. Bye.